It's a great pleasure to be with you. I have been working on a bunch of different things, and I'll try and run through a variety of U.S. and global economic challenges and some solutions that the challenges we're facing and the way we might get out from under them. And you'll see if you hear in the solutions anything you've been hearing in the debates by the presidential candidates. So let me start by saying that the clicker's not working. Maybe, okay. Oh, here we go. Let's see. Maybe it works. Okay, good. So here's a summary of, here's what I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to tell you what I told you, which is the secrets to a good lecture, I guess. So we have slow U.S. growth. We've got economic stagnation for the middle class. The American dream is dead. I'm going to pronounce it completely dead tonight and show you some data that supports that. I'm going to point out that we've got a lot of smart machines that are taking people's jobs. The Luddites were a group that in the 1820s went after machines with axes and all kinds of instruments to try and destroy the machines because they thought the machines were taking their jobs. And today we have a lot of machines that are taking a lot of people's jobs on a daily basis. And you can see that at the CVS checkout, that you've got machines now doing the jobs of people. And it used to be that we had a couple of the machines and a lot of people behind the counter. Then we had some more machines and some people watching the machines, make sure you learned how to use them. Then we had mostly machines and a few people. In a few days or years, we're going to have just machines and no people. And that's an issue for the entire country. We've got really low rates of U.S. saving and investment. We've had a downhill slide in both of these economic variables for decades now, 6 decades. The country's not saving, it's not investing, and it's going downhill. We have a long-term take-as-you-go policy, a Ponzi scheme we've been running also for 6 decades. It's running the country broke. The country is broke right now. It's not broke in 20 years or 40 years or 50 years. It's broke today. And I'll show you just how broke it is. You're going to have nightmares tonight. I just want you to know. Then we've got the Federal Reserve. We have Bill here who may or may not defend the Federal Reserve since he's the former governor of the Bank of Atlanta, right? The Atlanta Fed, Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. And the Fed's been printing vast sums of money to pay the government's bills. And I'm going to show you exactly how much. We've got the possibility of hyperinflation that the Fed has put into place. Then we've got demographics going on that are absolutely out the wazoo in terms of the number of people that we're adding to this country's number of people. And then we've got a global change in demographics, which is also quite shocking. So these are the challenges that we're facing in this 21st century. Here's the growth picture. This is the 30s. You know, you had very bad growth, and then you had some recovery, and then some bad growth again, and then World War II took over, and a lot of growth, and then, but you can basically see a downhill slide in the U.S. growth rate. The part of what we're seeing of late is a very low rate of employment relative to the population. That's the employment population ratio in red. You'd expect the employment population growth rate to decline, that ratio to decline, because of the fact that the baby boomers are retiring. There's a lot of us. We haven't had that many children to come into the workforce. So you would expect, just on the demographics, to see a decline in the population to people ratio. But we've got less, we've got a couple percentage points lower number right now than we would expect based on that demographics. Here's what's happened to U.S. productivity. Here's what's happening to real median household income. And we're going back, about 20 years now. And median income today is not much higher than it was in 1995. This is with a lot of people working a lot more hours. You've got people working either overtime or 2 jobs, or both spouses are working. People working harder to keep up their real incomes as a household. Meanwhile, output per person is going up. And this is also part of the story about the machines. The machines are becoming, they're replacing people because the machines are more and more like people in terms of what they can do. It's not like technological change was in the past. I can't say this for sure because you can make a counter argument. We have had machines that took over a lot of people's jobs, like the train. They took over the wagon trains, train drivers, but the trains needed conductors, and they needed people to build the tracks, and they needed people to drive the trains. And the horse and buggy was replaced by the taxi cab. The taxi cab also still needed a driver, which so we've always had technological change that replaces labor, but this seems to be a little bit different. It looks like the machines are closer to us than they are to this physical capital. So somebody's getting more, and it's not us. Or at least it's not the typical worker or the typical household. We've had some earnings inequality occur. Now, here's what the Federal Reserve shows you as hourly earnings. So, sorry. Let me go back. This is hourly earnings for production workers in real dollars. So it does not include fringe benefits. A lot of our fringe benefits are paying more and more to the healthcare sector for healthcare outcomes that are not particularly good. So you may call those raises that we've experienced, because if you did graph total compensation, including those fringe benefits, there would be something of an increase. But ignoring those fringe benefits, you can see that right now, real wages per hour are basically where they were in 1965. Now, the American dream is that these guys, that this number would be far higher than that number. This number is where that number is. That means the American dream is over. It's dead. It's not a dream, it's a fantasy. And we should declare it dead until it's alive again. But what about these smart machines? I think, again, they're part and parcel of that story. Well, look at all the things they can do. They can bomb our enemies. They can vacuum our floors. They can drive our cars. They can rub our backs. They can land our planes. They can sell us everything. They can teach us everything. They can beat us at Jeopardy and chess. They can audit our taxes. They can check us out at the store. They can give us directions. They can DJ our parties. They can pay our bills. They can sing and read to us. They can pick our fruit. They can balance our portfolios with those robo-investors, robo-investing websites now. They can diagnose our illnesses. They can check us through security. They can take virtually all our jobs. And I'm sure that somebody will invent an application that can pray for us. Just a matter of time. Maybe you guys will be the first to do it. Maybe that exists already. So I wrote a paper with Jeff Sachs, who's a professor at Columbia in economics, and two grad students of mine, Seth Benzel and Guillermo Lagarda. And we have this paper called Robots Are Us, Some Economics of Human Replacement. If you want to read it, you can go to my website, which is kotlikoff.net. It's not too hard a paper to read. And the basic idea works like this. And this is a very stylized model. Economists construct hypothetical worlds to try and get some insight. So this is a very simplified, stylized setting. And here's the idea. That we're going along, the economy is doing fine. All of a sudden, and there's two goods that are being produced. one good is like corn, and it's being produced with two inputs. One is capital. It could be seeds, is the capital. And the other good is code, know-how, how to do it. And so you have a technology that's really like a smart machine. It can make corn with two things, basically capital, physical stuff, and code. And then you also have another sector, which is spirituality, that makes prayers. And there's two types of workers. There's coders who can make code, and then you have, and they can also work in making prayers. And then you have unskilled workers who cannot code, but they can pray for you. So the spirituality sector doesn't use anything but people. And what happens in this little model is that all of a sudden the silicon chip is invented, and the code now can be retained. It doesn't depreciate as rapidly. It can be remembered. That's really what the silicon chip is about. It can store information, instructions. And so what happens in this model, and you've got young people and old people. The young people are the coders and the prayers, and the unskilled prayers, or so you got the skilled and the unskilled. And they, when they're young, they work and they get some pay in whatever they're doing, and they save some of it and they bring it into old age, and that represents they're bringing capital into their old age. And what happens in this little model is that when you have the silicon chip invented, well, the coders now realize that that chip, that the code that they produce can be not just used next period, but the period after and the period after. It's going to depreciate, but at a slower rate. That's the innovation, technological change here. And so they've got an asset that they can sell. So this is good time for coders. People become coders. They leave, the ones who were doing the praying for other people, leave that sector, go into the coding sector. There's a boom in the coding sector. Wages for them go up. Wages for the unskilled workers go up too, because there's fewer people that they are competing with to make prayers. And then we have a couple periods where we got some booms going on. In a while that the economy is doing well and output's higher, and you accumulate this code. Now, over time, this code, which is really embedding the work of dead coders, okay, becomes a form of competition with new coders, because once you have all this old code, this legacy code, you just have to basically replace it. You don't have to produce new code. Think about IBM's Blue computer. I think it's what is it? Think Blue. It was called Big Blue. That's it. Now you guys are all too young, with the exception of Bill and me, I guess, to remember Big Blue. We used to have grandmasters in chess. We still do, but they used to be a big deal. Like Bobby Fischer was the American hero. He was a grandmaster until he went a little bit crazy. He was a big American hero, and until he decided he liked he hated the U.S. and left for a while. He was a little bit eccentric, but he was the champion chess player in the entire world. You fast forward a couple decades, you've got Kasparov, I guess, what's his first name? Andrei Kasparov, who is the grandmaster, the top chess player in the world. He's Russian. And Kasparov is challenged by IBM, who has made Big Blue. And IBM says, we have this computer chess machine that's going to beat you. And Kasparov says, no way. And they have a tournament, and guess who wins? Big Blue. And I think maybe the second time around, maybe Kasparov did okay for the first time, but the second round he got pretty well defeated, because Big Blue could think like 30 moves ahead, and Kasparov could maybe think 15 moves ahead. and it was game over. So we have this machine that was built in the 1970s. It was, I think it was in the 70s. I may be off by a decade. Anyway, it was a very big machine. It was probably big enough to fill up this, most of this area here, as I recall. And today, you can probably put that same program on my little laptop, which is over there, my little ThinkPad, because the capacity of these chips has increased so much. But the point is that we didn't need to make another Big Blue. We had a computer that could beat every single human on the face of the earth now and through the end of time. We didn't need any more coders to code computers to compete with humans. We already had one that could beat all humans forever. That's the idea of the coders putting themselves out of work. So in this model, there's this boom, and then there's this bust. The coders start losing out in the marketplace. Their wages start dropping. They start moving back into making prayers. They start competing with the unskilled workers. They drive down the wages. In the unskilled sector, they drive down, their own wages drop because they're competing with dead coders. You got the live coders competing with the dead coders. And what happens? Well, the young people then have very little in the way of income. And so they're doing some consumption, but they can't save a whole lot. So therefore, they can't bring in a lot of capital into the next period for their kids to work with. And in addition, part of their savings is going into this other security, which is code, because code becomes an asset that you can buy some existing code that's been produced, and you can then hold on to it, get a return on it, or sell it. So it kind of crowds out the accumulation of capital. So we have two mechanisms by which there's less capital. So in the long run in this economy, you end up with much better code, but much less capital. And for reasonable parameters, you end up with an economy in which everybody is worse off forever. Okay? Now think about this. This is really a story about the robots being so productive that they put us out of work to the point where we can't buy what they make. And one of the things they make is they're making this corn, which is the capital in this model. It can either be consumed or planted. And so the demand for that output being produced by this smart machine, the combination of capital and code, the demand for that to bring into next period goes down, so people can't buy what these things produce, and they end up worse off. So machines can put themselves out of business too. So you can see that it's not hard to have what we call immiserating growth occur. It's not hard to produce a model in which this whole thing about technology is a bad news for future generations. There's other parameters in which everybody's better off, so it's not the only possibility, but it's one that's scary enough for us to pay attention to. And it may have something to do with that last picture, right, this picture right here, and there's other factors involved here. We've got the internet allowing people in India to answer questions about all the different products, to do customer support, to replace Americans. You can outsource jobs very quickly to people in India and other countries. So we're competing with foreign workers to a much greater extent than used to be the case. And that also may explain some of what's going on here. So here's what's happened to national saving. It's gone right downhill. That's the blue curve. You see it was around 15%, 16% in the early 50s. Now it's about 4%. The domestic investment rate is the red curve. And the difference between these two is the current account deficit. We had big current account deficits. Foreigners were bringing some of their capital into the US. and investing it. That's why investment was higher than saving. But today, foreigners are not investing a whole lot in the U.S. We're not investing a whole lot in the U.S. And so the domestic investment rate is also around 4% compared to 15%. Now, you ask yourself the question, what explains that? Well, yes, it's partly the fact that young people's wages haven't risen. They probably would have been able to save more, and we'd have a higher saving rate, so that's part of the story. But if you look within, some people might say, well, the government's consuming a whole lot more. That's why the national saving rate is lower. It turns out that out of the 11 percentage point decline in national saving from here to here, only 1 percentage point of the 11 is due to higher consumption by state and federal and local government. It's all due to household consumption. It's almost all due to household consumption as a share of national income going up. So households are consuming more. Why is it that households are consuming more? Who is it that's consuming so much more if wages are stagnating? Anybody have an idea? No ideas? Well, let me show you a picture. This one picture tells 1,000 words in economics. This is the picture. This is a picture of consumption by age back in 1960. So this was, if you take average consumption at, let's say, age 40 and divide it by the overall average, you got that number. If you take the consumption of an 80-year-old in 1960, divide by overall average consumption, it's down here. So this is showing you that 80-year-olds on average consumed a whole lot less than 40-year-olds. Look at that picture today. 80-year-olds are consuming a whole lot more than 40-year-olds. The ratio of the 80-year-olds' consumption to the 40-year-olds' consumption. So you can see that a lot of this has to do with health expenditures going up. But, that's also, so whether this was forced feeding of the elderly by the government, the fact of the matter is that we've had a big increase in consumption as a share of national income, and we've had a big increase, and the people that are consuming more are older people. And why are they consuming more? Well, here's the ratio of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid benefits as a share of GDP. And you can see that it was around 5% back then. It's heading up to 2025. It's predicted to be 12%. That's a lot of GDP being taken from young people in the form of taxes and given to old people in the form of benefits of these three kinds. Somebody like me, when I retire, I'll be getting a Social Security check each year, which is about, I figure, maybe $40,000. My ex-wife will get a check around probably $15,000 per year. And that's, my new wife will collect on her own record. But anyway, just think about me. If I'm getting $40,000 from Social Security and maybe spending another $15,000, getting $15,000 from Medicare, that's $60,000. The average wage in this country is around $50,000, average annual earnings. That's the average, not the median. The median is lower. So it's a big number. We're giving a lot of money to a lot of people, and Social Security is progressive. So even though the number to me is pretty high and I'm a high earner, the number to somebody who's who's middle class is not that much lower. And they're going to get the same Medicare benefits because they're given independent of your earnings. They're just depend on how sick you are. So I might get less than the average person because I may not, hopefully not be that sick. Now, so here's the question. Can we pay for all this? We've been taking from the young and giving to the old. We've been going to young people who are over here and taking money from them. Let's think about it as corn to keep it simple. So I come to, what's your name? Stephanie. I come to Stephanie. I'm Uncle Sam. I grab some money from you. This is, in effect, corn. and you have this, and I take it, and I go over to this old person. What's your name? Jamil? JB? JBL. Yes. Okay. So I give it to you, and you spend it because you don't. Okay, go ahead. You spend it because you don't care about her. You're out for yourself. Older people, we find out empirically, do not give a damn about their kids. Okay, they spend as if their kids were foreigners or not related to them. So I took this money from you, but when I did that, I promised to give you a lot of money back in exchange in the future, so that you wouldn't object. You wouldn't think about this as a tax. I can call this a contribution, but it's also listed as a FICA tax. So I take this money and I use those words, and at the same time I promise, I say, do not worry, I'm calling this a tax, and I'm promising you a whole lot of benefits when you're old. Just don't worry about that it being a tax, because you're going to get it back plus a whole lot more. Now, in making that promise and using those words, that promise is not put onto the books as an obligation. It's not an official obligation. But you're certainly counting on it. Where am I going to get that, the corn or the money to give you? Well, you're sitting over here when he's passed away and has consumed all that. His consumption's gone up. National savings gone down. You're consuming no less because you think maybe you're even going to consume more because you've been told you're going to get a big return on this, whatever it is. And so you're sitting over there, and I come to your kids, and I grab some corn from young Jason here, your child, and give it to you. And I say, Jason, and I have to take even more corn from him because I've made a really big promise to you. I take even more from him, and I say, don't worry, I'm going to pay you back this plus a whole lot more. And so I come to Jason's over there, I come to his grandkids. This is what you call a Ponzi scheme, because there's a natural end to this, which is when we get to a point where we take everything that the kids, that some generation earns in order to pay off the elderly, these promises, then it's game over. That's what we're heading to. And that's what this fiscal gap shows us, that the country is broke, that the obligations far exceed the ability to pay them. Now, remember, I'm using these words, taxation, transfer payment. That doesn't affect the deficit, the reported deficit. What if I said to you that I'm borrowing the same amount of corn and I make a transfer payment to you? So now I've got no extra taxes, but extra spending. And then this obligation to pay you back with interest is put on the books. Okay, so by the choice of words, we end up producing the deficit we want to publicize, we want to announce to the public. Congress is choosing the words. Congress has a reason to try and choose words to hide what it's doing, to hide the fact that it's accumulating large obligations that have to be paid by future generations, because going back to Thomas Jefferson, and even before that, people realized that leaving obligations to future generations is ethically inappropriate. It's immoral. It's stealing from unborn generations, from young children and future children. So I don't know how many of you have ever heard of the name Enron. Enron was an oil trading company. They were discovered to be lying about their true obligations. They came up with these accounting devices with the help of one of the largest accounting companies in the world. What's the name of that company? Arthur Andersen. Arthur Andersen ended up, it's a very venerable accounting firm. They ended up having to dissolve. The government put them out of business. They were so much involved with helping Enron lie about its books. So Enron stock was up here when it was actually bankrupt. Well, Enron learned how to do this stuff, how to lie about its books, how to keep things off the books, how to keep liabilities off the books from the U.S. Congress and the successive presidents. This is a 6-decade policy of taking from the young, giving to the old. It's called take as you go. That's what I call it. Now, people in Washington call it pay as you go, but the payers are different from the takers. So it's really taking from the young and giving to the old. It's take as you go, not pay as you go. And economics is very clear. We're saying in economics, our theory says that the deficit is not well defined. It's a matter of words. Just like in physics, the length of this table is not well defined. Neither is the time right now. That's what Einstein taught us, right? Theory of general relativity or special relativity. I'm not knowledgeable enough in physics to say. I think it's special relativity, where he said that time and distance are not well defined. How you measure time and how you measure distance, right here and now, depends on whether you're heading through space in this direction at a certain rate of speed. If you're doing that, you're going to measure time and distance right here and now differently from, you're not here, you're over there, but how you view the time and the distance right here of this table is going to depend on your frame of reference, your language. So we have in economics, in our theory, exactly the same problem as the physicists have when it comes to time and distance. We have a theory that says that certain things are not well-defined concepts. They're not worth measuring because they're a matter of language. You could use one set of words or another set of words, end up with any size deficit you want, any size debt. And what are we doing? We are guiding our fiscal policy decade after decade, administration after administration, based on the size of the debt and the size of the deficit. We almost had Congress shutting down the government because we were going to exceed the debt ceiling. Well, to an economist, that whole thing is absurd. That entire discussion is absurd because the debt is an arbitrary measure of words, of our choice of language. It's nothing to do with what our true fiscal situation is. Our true fiscal situation is measured by the fiscal gap, which puts everything on the books. And how does it work? It's very simple. You look at all the spending that the government is projected to do, including servicing the official debt. So if they want to use the words borrowing, and lending, or borrowing and transfer payments, that means you have to repay principal plus interest in the future. That's an expenditure in the future. That gets included. It doesn't matter what it's called. All you care about in the fiscal gap calculation is what has to be paid out. You take the whole path of future expenditures out to the end of time. You form the value in the present value, and that's the obligation that has to be paid. Then you compare that with the present value of all the taxes and other receipts that the government projects are going to be coming in. And the difference is what you're short. Very simple. Everything's on the books. Now, our official debt is $13 trillion based on the words we're using. We could make it negative 13 trillion. We could make it 13 zillion if we wanted to use different words. So there's nothing sacrosanct. There's nothing economic about the government's choice of words. Just like there's nothing special. Economic theory, our math, doesn't tell us whether to discuss the equations in an economic model with French or German or Swahili or anything. Okay? There's theory and then there's words. And you can get mixed up in the words. And we've gotten heavily mixed up in the words to the point that the entire press, the IMF, the World Bank, all the agencies of Congress and the government are totally confused about what it is we should be measuring and what our true fiscal situation is. I describe this as driving in New York with a map of Los Angeles. That's how we're conducting our fiscal policy. What is the size of our fiscal gap? Our official debt that's being reported and we're talking about is about 70% of GDP. Sounds like a big number. It used to be around 30% before GW took over, and then we had the Great Recession. Greece's official debt is around 170% of GDP. We feel very proud that we're in much better shape than Greece. If you actually measure Greece's official debt at market prices rather than lie about its value, and it's being carried at book value rather than market value, and some of you guys are in finance and know the difference, you'll find out that the Greek official debt as a share of GDP is also around 70%. They're actually not more indebted on an official basis if you want to use official debt. But I think official debt is absolutely meaningless. I think that any of your professors who ever use the word deficit, debt, taxes, transfer payments in class again, you should get up and walk out. Okay? Because they're talking nonsense. They're talking language. You're in a class, you paid for a class in economics, and you've entered into a class in linguistics. So get up and leave. Say you're engaged in linguistics. I'm not here to learn about linguistics. I took an economics course, not a linguistics course. I'm leaving. Okay? And see how that goes over. and bring some other buddies along with you. And they will start quickly learning how to talk about the fiscal gap, which is the key issue. So the fiscal gap is different from the official debt. The official debt is a meaningless number. Our meaningless number is $13 trillion. If you take the government's words, the government's labeling conventions, how it calls things, I could make it something else. You know, I could say everything I borrow is actually a tax, and the money I'm going to pay in the future, principal plus interest, is actually just a transfer payment. Or I could say half of what I'm borrowing from you is a tax, and the other half is actually borrowing. Or I could say that I'm taxing you 3 times as much and I'm making a transfer payment back to you, in which case I can start talking about a surplus this period. You can make it any number you want just by using words. It has nothing at all to do with, and you can do this independent of what's going on in the real economy. All you need is a model with rational actors who are not confused by words. And you have the proposition that deficits and debt are not well defined, and neither are taxes and transfers. Therefore, the cash flows of a country are not well defined. Therefore, we cannot say that in the short run we're okay, in the long run we're bad shape. The cash flows aren't well defined. Therefore, we can only talk about the whole run, the whole future of the economy, and that's where the fiscal gap is, because it's a present value measure. It's looking at the entire course of the economy and how big is it? Is it 14 trillion? The official debt's 13 trillion. How many people think it's 14 trillion? How many people think it's 15 trillion? How many people think it's 50 trillion? That's a pretty big number. Anybody think it's bigger than 50 trillion? Okay. Anybody think it's bigger than 75 trillion? No hands. Here's how big it is. 200 trillion. That's based on the CBO did a projection called the Alternative Fiscal Forecast. They put this out every year, and they try and submerge it, and they've been trying to hide it more and more through time. And you can take their numbers. They don't actually calculate a fiscal gap. It takes me 5 minutes, literally 5 minutes, to take their projection, turn it into a fiscal gap number. I've been doing this every year. I seem to be the only economist in the country who does this. And I annoy people, apparently, telling the truth. This number was around 60 trillion when President GW took office. When he left office, it was around maybe 140 trillion or so. President Obama's and the Great Recession have made it much larger. Part of the reason is that this is our credit card bill. This is just like if you had a credit card bill, you know that if you don't pay anything on it, it's going to get bigger next year. It's going to grow with interest. This thing does too. And so, you know, if we do nothing, that number will probably be another 5 trillion larger next year. Or actually about $6 trillion bigger. Okay, so what would it take to get rid of the fiscal gap? I want to show you how broke we are. suppose we were to try and get rid of the fiscal gap, and economic theory says you have to get the fiscal gap down to 0. Otherwise, you end up with game over. You end up having to take more from the young people at some point than they actually make. That's game over. You're actually trying to, fundamentally, what a fiscal gap means, having a fiscal gap means that the country is trying to consume more than it actually has in productive resources now and in the future. The productive resources are the total capital stock, the wealth of the country, plus all the human wealth, all the present value of all future labor income that's going to be produced in the country. If you try and consume more than that, well, who's going to pay for it? The Russians? No. God? No. He's not that involved with us, apparently. Or not on a daily basis, not fiscally speaking. So what we could do is raise everybody's taxes. Every single federal tax would have to go up by 53% immediately and permanently. Do you work? Do you work? Yes. Do you pay taxes, federal income tax? Do you see your payroll, your pay stub? It's deductions, right? FICA. Imagine having that 53% higher this year and the rest of your life, every day for the rest of your, every week, every month, every year, for the rest of your life, 53% higher. That's what's required. That's according to the CBO. It's not this crazy economist up front here. It's the CBO, Congressional Budget Office. That's what they think. They just don't want to tell you in black and white. And what if we wait? What if we let Bill and me, who are older people, where are we going to be in 20 years? Well, I'm going to be 84. I'm not going to have to pay too many taxes at that point. I won't be working, probably. Well, I might be still working. But other people 84 aren't going to be working. So we will have gotten off the hook of not having had to pay higher taxes. We'll be able to have more fried chicken steak dinners, whatever it is you have down here, with gravy and double mash and all that stuff, collard greens. Whatever it is you guys eat down here. I'm from Boston. It's unusual. Very good stuff. I had my fill at lunch. It was very good. So we'll get to consume more. The country will save less. There'll be less investment, and that will make things even worse for the next generation. So there's a double whammy. The next generation will face a 69% tax if we wait till 2045, and they'll have lower wages because they'll have less capital to work with, less tools to work with. This is immoral. This is generational theft. This is a war on our children. We've got several different battles going on with our children. We've got climate change. We've got poor education that we're providing a lot of our children, if not most of our children. We've got wars that anybody with a brain in his head would realize are not winnable, where we just send off young people to get maimed or killed. And then we got climate change, and we got this. I would say we're at war with our children. I've been officially, not officially, I'm not official anything. I've been publicly calling for us to declare war on our children, to have an official declaration of war issued by Congress that says we are at war with our children, because Congress is supposed to declare war. Now, obviously, this is just a kind of a way to think about what we're up to. It's not a practical idea. I doubt Congress will, but maybe somebody in Congress would introduce a resolution declaring war on our children. I think it's a good idea. It would be healthy. Now, we could also go a different route, which is to cut spending. Now, my mom is 96. We could cut her Social Security benefits and her Medicare benefits and her Medicaid benefits by 35% starting today and forever. That wouldn't go over too well with the elderly. Or we could wait for the elderly to cut their benefits when I'm 84, cut my benefits by 43%. Wouldn't be too happy either. So you can see we are in deep doo-doo. That's an old-time expression for something else that you guys would use. It's not a polite expression. but you can think about what I mean. We are beep, okay? Right? So, and you have not heard this in any of the presidential debates. The only person that's remotely discussing this is Ben Carson, Dr. Carson. Not that I'm a supporter of Dr. Carson. I think he says a lot of crazy things. But he also says a lot of reasonable, smart things. And one of the things he's talking about, quite honestly, I don't know that it, yeah, I do think he says crazy things. I go on the record to say that. But he does talk about the size of the fiscal gap in his campaign speeches. And he got that from me, and he called me up, and we spent about an hour talking about it on the phone about a month ago or so. And we had a nice chat. But none of the other candidates have called. I'm waiting. And I'm getting a little bit antsy. You know, I think maybe they should be calling. Here's what we're doing to deal with some of our fiscal problems, and this bill may have a reaction to this. So when a country is in trouble, what do they do? On the fiscal side, and you have a printing press, what do? You print money, and you pay for your bills by printing money. Now in the US, we have this very interesting way of disguising that. We have the Treasury. You're the Treasury. You go to, what's your name?
Savannah.
Sven? Mm-hmm. Sven from where?
Savannah.
Savannah. Sven from Savannah. Okay. What?
I'm Savannah from Murfreesboro.
Murfreesboro. Okay. Okay. So, what's your first name again?
Stephanie.
Stephanie. Stephanie comes. She's the Treasury. She borrows money from you, and she gives you back an IOU. Okay, a bond, a Treasury bond. There it is. You give her some money. You take the money and you go buy a chicken from, what's your name? Nan. You buy a chicken and give it to the president for lunch, okay? The money your money is now in his hands, okay? I'm the Federal Reserve. I print up some fresh money, the same amount that you gave Stephanie. I print up some fresh money, and I go and I give you that money, and I take back the bond. I buy the bond back from you, okay? You're sitting with the same amount of money you had initially. You're sitting with more dollar bills. You've gotten the chicken to give to the president, okay? The Treasury and I, the Fed and the Treasury collectively just printed money to buy that damn chicken, okay? Now, we've been doing a lot of buying of chickens by printing money. And we've been printing since 2007 something like $3.2 trillion. That's about 3/4 of a year of federal spending, maybe even more. Let's see. Federal spending is probably about 10% of GDP. Maybe it's even 2 years of federal spending. It's a lot of money, okay, to be printing. And that's a sign of a country that's going broke. Now, this is all being disguised as quantitative easing. It's being called quantitative easing. It's being called a mechanism to keep interest rates low, to keep the economy stimulated. It's all hogwash, because interest rates, whether they're a little bit higher or lower, this economy has grown very well with high interest rates, very poorly with low interest rates. It just is not directly connected, whether interest rates are high or low. The real thing is we're just printing money to buy the chickens. And that's dangerous, because there's a lot of money out there now. And what also the Federal Reserve has been doing is been bribing the banks to not lend out that money. So the Fed's been printing this money, claiming that they're trying to get the economy stimulated, but then at the same time they're bribing people like you to put the money in the bank and not lend it out, and then have the bankers not lend it out, because they're paying the bank's interest on their reserves. So they've got this conscious policy they've had for 8 years now of enticing the banks not to make loans. So that's been working. It's kept inflation low. But they have to pay interest. And at the same time, it hasn't worked perfectly because there's still, this is what our basic measure of the money supply called M1. And it's doubled since 2007. So our prices have only increased by about 15, 17%, but the money supply has doubled. So if you double the money supply, you would expect if in normal times you would have a doubling in the price level. That hasn't happened yet, but it could happen because if we think about, I don't know how much you guys have had a course in money and banking, but there's two equations here. This is called the money, this is M1. This is how much money that has been printed. And this is what's called the money multiplier. And I won't get into the details, but if that little m and the v up there, which is called the velocity of money, went back to their values in 2007, our price level would not be 17% higher than it was in 2007. It would be 300% higher. In other words, we have in place the basis for a hyperinflation. If prices went up over the next few years by 300%, if they tripled, a hot dog that costs now $1 would cost $3. That's very high inflation. We had the highest inflation I can recall was about 10% in the 70s, late 70s. So we're playing with fire here. The banks can lend out that money if they want. If the public were to start understanding that the government is printing money like crazy to pay for the bills and that the country's broke and has no clear way to pay for its spending and politically can't cut its spending and therefore is printing money like crazy, like any broke country like Zimbabwe, like Argentina, like Russia did in the late 90s, like 22 countries did in the last century, Germany, Hungary, hyperinflations. They all printed money because they couldn't pay for their bills and they didn't want to cut the bills. If the public understood that, they would start worrying about inflation. They would make money into a hot potato. So money that's moving faster around the economy, that's velocity. That's the amount of money, M1. If this thing goes up, that's like having a bigger M. And that makes, if this is real output, if that doesn't change, if we're at full capacity when we've got pretty much full employment, then the only thing that happens is the price goes up, price level goes up. So if velocity went back to where it was, and if the banks started lending out money like they used to, then this little m would be back to where it was. And that means that we'd have both V going up and M going up and P going up even more by a factor of 3. That's what our Federal Reserve has done. Now, the Federal Reserve Chairman is a very close friend of mine, Janet Yellen. She's not responsible for this. If you go back a few slides, you'll see that she's kind of stopped the printing of money. And I went and had dinner with her and her husband, and we're buddies. And I said, Janet, this is the sign of a broke country. We have a fiscal gap of $200 trillion. What you guys are doing, you're calling this quantitative easing. That's just words. But what you're really doing is easing the burden on Congress from paying its bills. And stop it because you're, OK? Now, Janet couldn't, you know, she's under strictures as to how much she can tell anybody because she has to keep properly, she has to be careful about how she talks about these things. So she said, you know, she listened to me politely, and I think she thought I was a little bit full of hot air, to tell you the truth. And I've talked to Timothy Geithner, who was the former Treasury Secretary, just 2 weeks ago about this. We happened to be in Korea together and had lunch together. And I'm not trying to drop names here. I'm just because I'm too old to give a damn about my reputation or anything like that, okay? I'm trying to say that we have officials that aren't as concerned about this as I am, okay? But they should be. The long history of the world shows that if you engage in this kind of, if you're broke and you print money, you have inflation, very high inflation. It's country after country, history after, going back to Diocletian in the year 300 AD. Roman emperor started printing, melting down coins of silver and whatever, gold, and reminting coins with less silver and content of gold and silver and more coins. And we had hyperinflation back then, and they had price controls. So this is a real danger. What else can we say that's going to make you very nervous tonight when you go to sleep? Well, we're not the only country that's engaged in this. Other countries are following our lead, but they're right kind of behind us. European Central Bank, Japanese Central Bank, Bank of England, they're each printing money like mad. And they're all broke. Very, very, very broke. We're probably more broke than Greece right now, if you measure things on a fiscal gap basis. Okay, Italy, on a fiscal gap basis, on an official debt basis, has about 120% of GDP. Debt is 120% of GDP. That's bigger than 70%. But if you look at their fiscal gap, it's negative 2% of GDP, of the present value of GDP. Ours is 10% of the present value of GDP. So we're in much worse shape than Italy. But their bonds are selling at a much higher rate, interest rate, because everybody thinks that Italy is in much worse shape. Well, they've had two major pension reforms. Our Social Security system is $26 trillion in the red. It's got a fiscal gap of $26 trillion according to the Social Security trustees. It's 32% underfinanced. Our entire country is 53% underfinanced. I just showed you that slide. So we're quite broke, and Greece has got, Italy has had two pension reforms, and we haven't had any pension reform with respect to Social Security to speak of. There have been some changes just recently, but they haven't been major in terms of cutting benefits. So the global financial system remains extremely fragile. That's another big problem. We had a big banking crisis a couple years ago, and we rebuilt the banking system essentially the same way it was, except we have some more regulatory agencies. If you go back to the Great Depression, they rebuilt the banking system the way it was. They just added a few regulatory agencies like the SEC and the FDIC. And right, it hasn't prevented us from having another collapse of the banking system. It was rebuilt. It was built to fail initially, and it's rebuilt to fail. And the core problems were never addressed, which are opacity and leverage. That nobody knows what these banks are investing in. Nobody can see it. And they're highly leveraged. They can be leveraged 33-to-1 according to the Basel III Accord, which is the central bank of all the, well, it's the authority that it's kind of, it's the clubhouse of all the central banks. They've agreed to let banks be 33-to-1 leverage, which means that if they have a 3% loss on their assets, they can go bankrupt. This is like, it's crazy. All you need is a few rumors about the assets being bad. That's where the opacity comes in. People will run to get their money or not make loans, and then the banks will have to sell assets in order to pay off the money that's going out, and that'll be a fire sale, and that will produce a decline in asset values of more than 3%, and you can have the whole banking world, again, be bankrupt. The way we're running this banking system is just absolutely insane. I wrote a book called Jimmy Stewart is Dead, which you might want to read, which talks about how to do it, how to fix the banking system. It's also kind of a fun read, so don't, it's not just a policy book. That's all way in the back. The rest of it is just my take on the whole financial crisis. I think you'll enjoy it. Anyway, here's a couple last things to say that are going to scare you even more. I haven't really, well, the population of the U.S. is growing like crazy. Our population by 2060 is going to be a third larger. That's like taking the entire population of the Philippines, like 100 million more people, and dumping them. Think about taking the entire population of the Philippines and dumping them in the United States today, in proportion to where people live now. So your town here would be a third more congested. Boston, it takes forever to drive anywhere these days. That's just been the last 5 years. It's gotten so much worse. These things change exponentially, the driving times. Just a little bit more traffic, nobody moves. In Manila, it takes about an hour to get to the airport. From the airport to a hotel is a mile away, an hour. I don't know what that is what the speed is per hour, but it's very slow, okay, in a taxi cab that's not air conditioned. And it's 95 degrees, and you've been on the plane for 25 hours, switching planes in Tokyo. You get off the plane, you say, oh great, I'm going to go to the hotel. You spend an hour in the taxi going a mile. Might as well walk, but it's too dangerous to walk. Okay, so the US population is going to explode. We're making no preparation for this demographic increase. We've got the centenarians, those are 100+ years old. They're the fastest growing age group. The census predicts we could have 4 million people over 100 by the middle of the century. That's a lot of people. They're really expensive to maintain. Sorry, it's just true. It's just they have a lot of costs, and I'm not saying get rid of them, but I'm just saying they haven't saved to take care of themselves, and we're gonna okay. So it could be 500,000, but the high end projection is 4 million. Now we're also going to have big changes in the demographics. So the minority of the population is going to be the majority, and that's not a concern per se, but the fact is that the minority has been less well educated so blacks and Hispanics have been less well educated than whites. And so we're going to have on average, a less well educated population down the road. And that's just a fact of life. Blacks and Hispanics come from poor circumstances, and their education is not as good. They've got bigger teacher to student ratios. They've got facilities aren't as good. There's less being spent on them than on white people, white kids, and their test scores are not as high. So that's going to be a factor in the economy in the future. Now here's one of the most scary slides I could show you, which is world population, and you see it goes exponential. It's going exponential. We're going to have about 2 more. Well, look. Right now, we're about 7 billion people. We're going to be about 9-something billion people. Right now, here we are, 7 billion. We're going to be over 9 billion, 9.2 billion. So this is, okay, so we're going to add 2.4 billion people to the planet in just 35 years. How old are you? 21. So you're going to be 56. There's going to be 2 more Chinas out there. Or you can think about this as 24 more Germanys. Or you could think about this as 7 more United States. That's the size of the world's population. Everybody producing more and more pollution, right? Heating up the climate, heating up the planet. The Chinese just yesterday announced that they had produced 17% more, they were burning 17% more coal than they had previously admitted to. For years now, they've been, in effect, lying about their coal production. So we've got Greenland, melting, and if Greenland melts, we have a 20-foot increase in the sea level. And, there's all kinds of demographic shockers. I won't take you through all those, but China and India, by the end of the century, are going to have 2/3 of the developed world's GDP. They will be the developed world. And the US are going to face massive fiscal problems in Europe. Japan's population is going to shrink 40%. India's GDP will grow by a factor of 9. So the US is going to become a big player in the world. And here's the big one, climate change. These are increases in sea level by the end of the century. It could be as much as 8 feet. If you have an 8 feet increase in sea level, my apartment building, I end up with seafront or oceanfront property. Okay, I live in the Back Bay in Boston, and it was, it used to be swamp that was filled in. It's going to be swamp again. So about half the world's population lives in the coastal plain. Bangladesh, with an 8-foot increase in sea level, will be completely underwater. Florida, underwater. I think you guys will be okay here. But Miami, it's gone. New York City, underwater. Imagine it's 20 feet. A good part of Long Island is also gone. Boston is over. And it's all over the world. Cities like London, where it's right on a river, right? The river will be 20 feet higher. New Orleans, forget about it. And we're not doing enough about this. We're engaged in trying to outproduce the Saudis when it comes to oil, with this shale oil in North Dakota and other parts of the country. So we've got big problems in River City here. That's an old expression from a movie. And, economics is called the dismal science. And it's called the dismal science for a reason. But economists also are good coming up with some solutions. They're just not ever listened to, because the economists that the politicians hire immediately become politicians. Like, it's an instant transformation. You look at the Republican economists, you look at the Democrat economists, they always say things that are politically correct for the person that they're working for. It's just disgusting. It's like, having a scientist tell you about something about the real world, and it's completely biased by who he's working for. You just wouldn't trust any scientist. You should not trust any economist working for any politician. I certainly don't. I know ahead of time what they're going to say. I have no reason to read anything they say. I know exactly what they're going to say, and it's all bullshit. So what do we need? We need more jobs. Well, one thing we could do is have a small business agency set up, be able to set up small businesses in one day. I've got a little software company. I have to pay tax returns, and I've got employees in 6 states. I've got to pay corporate taxes in 6 states, sales taxes in 6 states, unemployment compensation in 6 states, withholding in 6 states for state income taxes, withholding for federal income taxes, and it becomes a nightmare. Very, very expensive to do business in this country. Just as bad as in a country like Russia. The bureaucracy has taken over. Well, I think that could be fixed by having a single state tax return or an agency to get everything set up, all the paperwork. I think we should use the internet to provide uniform education to K through 12. Let kids get the best teachers, the same really excellent teachers, to teach them by video at their pace in their own pod for part of the day. And have the teachers come in. If we're going to have machines, smart machines, let's help them. Let's use them where it really counts on education. So everybody gets the same fair education, same quality education. Let's get the employers out of all these things, helping us save, helping us pay tax, figuring out how much taxes we should pay, how we should invest, what portfolios we are allowed to invest in, and how much insurance we should have when it comes to medical insurance, and what doctors we can see. That's not the job of employers. They should never have been put in that position. We should say, absolutely, employers have nothing to do with any of these things. Their job is to make jobs and get out of the way, not to run our lives. They're not our parents, they're not our friends. They made a hash of all this stuff. Get out of it, okay? Let's throw them out of that job. We should fundamentally reform taxes, Social Security, healthcare, and banking. We should adopt the Inform Act, which requires fiscal gap accounting. And if you want to read about the Inform Act, which was endorsed by 17 Nobel Prize winners, 17 Nobel Prize winners. We only have about 22 in the country, American Nobel Prize winners. 17 have endorsed the provision, a bill that would force the CBO to do one thing, which is report on its website the size of the fiscal gap every year. And the CBO directors, one after the next, whether it's Republican or Democrat, will not do it. Even though the entire economics profession, 17 Nobel Prize winners, George Shultz, the former Secretary of State, Treasury, Commerce, OMB director, he's endorsed the bill. We've got people on the right, the left, in terms of economists. We've got 1,200 of the top economists in the country and not so famous economists have all endorsed the Inform Act. From every top department in the country, it has not passed because there are people that don't want the truth out. And then this is another, and the last web thing I'm going to say, which is if you go to the purpleplans.org, what does purple mean? It's a combination of red and blue. We've got red Republicans, blue Democrats. They can't talk to each other. They basically agree in large part about the choice of words, or some part of what they're fighting over is the choice of words. These purple plans are what economists would do, I think, and they've been endorsed by a lot of economists. They fix banking, they fix taxes, they fix Social Security, they fix healthcare, they fix education. Maybe not perfectly, education's a tough one. They fix the climate. They're real plans by economists. I wrote the thing, so it's me, I'm an economist, but I talked to a lot of economists. They're all short. They're a postcard length. That would be a platform for a presidential candidate. So, if I run for president, will you vote for me? That's my question. Read the plans first. I got one vote there. The last time I ran for president, which was in 2012, there was a platform called Americans Elect. You could run for president as a third-party candidate. It was up for like 5 months. There's some guys in Wall Street and gals put up $30 million to get this thing going. It was done in a very weird, strange way. I think it was a stalking horse for Mayor Bloomberg. He decided not to run, and then they shut it down. So I was a candidate for president for 5 months, and I have a website called Kotlikoff2012.org. And I kept it up there because I figured maybe a real candidate would actually want to see what a real platform looks like. And you guys could take a look. So I'm thinking about changing the 2 at the end of 2012 to a 6 and running again. And you can run without being a Democrat or a Republican. All you have to do is have people write you in at the ballot on election day. So I may write a book called Write Me In, and if I do, I hope you'll all endorse me. Or write me in when you actually show up at the polls, because we need to fix these things. And there's 535 members of Congress. Not a single one of them has a degree in economics, a PhD at least, and a higher level degree. So we've got amateur hour, we've got lying, we've got the Fed lying, we've got people hiding the facts. That's what we've got going on. And we've got the American dream in tatters. Let me stop there and see if you have some questions. Thanks, Dave.